Have you ever heard a forest breathe? Not the wind, not the animals, but a rhythm, deep, slow, and heartbreakingly human. In Bitterroot, every night, charcoal marks appear on the trails. No words, just patterns. 4 short inhales, 2 long exhales, and when you breathe in sync, the leaves shift, the wind turns, and something begins to listen. I'm Lila Monroe, a forest ranger, and once a lost child found with a mark on my wrist. Now I've returned to uncover who or what saved me. If you've ever felt the forest watching, listening, you weren't imagining it. Because in the next 60 seconds, I'll show you how something the world calls a monster chose mercy, chose to protect, and forgave the one who tried to kill it. I saw it. 2 meters tall, covered in dark fur, eyes of amber. It shielded me from a bullet, healed a man who didn't deserve it, and left behind a single handprint made of ash, not blood. If you still think Bigfoot is just a myth, you're about to unlearn everything. Because Scala is still here, and if you skip this story, you'll never understand how something that never speaks can still change us forever. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments so I can say hello from the forest, by name. At first light, the forest didn't stir. It breathed. A soft veil of mist clung to the Bitterroot range, like it had been exhaled by the trees themselves. The air smelled of wet bark, pine oil, and something older. Ferns crushed under hooves, moss touched by morning. For a moment, everything held still. Then, a sharp whinny broke the quiet. Storm's hooves beat the damp earth, echoing like a warning. His mane tossed in panic as his body tensed beneath the saddle. Lila Monroe leaned forward, one hand firm on the reins, the other reaching toward the ridge's edge. "Easy, boy," she muttered. Her breath misted, drawn short from the climb. The trail had eroded badly over the last few weeks. She'd been sent to scout it. Simple terrain recon, they told her at dispatch. But the land wasn't simple anymore. Not since the rains. Chunks of shale had sloughed off the hillside, and something strange had caught her eye. Furrows in the soil, wide and linear, like logs dragged through mud. But there were no hauling permits issued here. The cut marks were fresh. She climbed down. Her boots sank slightly into the mossy earth. Kneeling beside the marks, she ran her gloved fingers along one deep groove. The soil was still damp underneath, disturbed maybe just hours ago. Whoever was doing this wasn't just poaching timber. They were nearby. Storm snorted again, then he screamed. A black blur sliced across the tree line. She turned fast. Too fast. Storm reared, hooves kicking air. Her hand missed the stirrup, and suddenly the earth gave way. Her feet lost grip. The slope crumbled beneath her like rotten crust. There wasn't time to scream. She tumbled backward into the ravine, branches snapping, wind ripping past her ears, the forest tilting sideways in a blur of green and sky. She caught the flash of Storm's pale flank above, vanishing over the ridge. Then the cold hit, sharp water up to her ribs, knocking breath from her lungs as she slammed into the creek bed. Silence. The world turned dark at the edges. Sounds blurred, leaves, hooves, the distant echo of thunder, though the sky was clear. And then, a presence, heavy, close. She felt it before she saw anything, like the forest had shifted weight, like someone, something, had leaned in. A faint warmth brushed her chest, a low, rhythmic vibration, barely sound, more like breath through a hollow tree. Her eyes flickered. A massive hand, matted with damp fur, wide as her torso, gently pressed something into the saddle on Storm's back. It was a braid, a black horsehair braid, the kind she tied each morning before patrol. Before she could reach, before she could speak, the shape vanished into the fog, soundless as snowfall. She woke with the scent of cedar in her nose. The cabin was dim, lit only by a single oil lantern that crackled softly in the far corner. Everything was wood. Walls, floor, the cot she lay on. Even the air felt carved. Outside, the forest whispered, rain tapping on the overhang. Her clothes had been changed. A wool blanket was tucked around her. Her arm ached from where she must have landed, but it wasn't broken. She sat up slowly, wincing. "You took a hell of a tumble," a voice said from the shadows. A man stepped forward, older, with a beard the color of wet gravel and lines carved deep into his face like the rings of an old stump. He wore a faded flannel and smelled faintly of ash and mint chewing tobacco. "Name's Ray Callahan," he said. "You're lucky your horse ran straight to my fence, screaming like the world was ending." She blinked. "You're the one who found me." Ray nodded. "Dragged you out of the creek. You were half blue. Thought you were gone, honestly." She tried to rise. Her balance swayed. He caught her shoulder gently. "Slow. Let the world stop spinning first." She looked around. Storm was tied outside the window, calm now, munching hay. A flicker of something glinted in her mind. Dark fur, breath like thunder, a hand. "You saw anyone else?" she asked suddenly. "Out there, before you found me?" Ray shook his head. "Just you. You talking about that log hauler you were after?" She hesitated. "No, something bigger." Ray gave her a long look, then shrugged. "These woods hold a lot of stories. Don't always need to poke at them right away." She turned her wrist absently, trying to make sense of the lingering chill in her bones, and stopped cold. There was a mark, right at the curve of her wrist, drawn in soot or charcoal. Faint, delicate. A leaf, soft rounded, not sharp like oak or maple, but broad and smooth, almost heart-shaped, like it had been brushed on with a finger. It hadn't been there this morning. She rubbed at it, but the mark didn't smudge. It had settled beneath her skin like it belonged. Later that night, she sat alone at the window. Storm had long since fallen asleep. The lantern had burned low. Outside, the trees stood watch, tall and mute. But something lingered at the edge of sound. Not wind, not quite animal. She leaned closer to the glass. Frost was forming at the edges, and there, somewhere just beyond the porch, something exhaled. It wasn't sharp, like a deer. It wasn't guttural, like a bear. It was slow, low, warm, like the forest itself had a chest, and it had just remembered to breathe. Her own chest rose to meet it, unconsciously. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, gone. Just mist again. Just trees. Just the whisper of needles in the air. But Lila Monroe wasn't the same. She hadn't dreamed it. That breath had felt like it knew her name. The cabin didn't have power. No TV. No hum of a refrigerator. Not even a ticking clock. Just the slow creak of wood shifting with temperature and time. And silence. A true, living silence. The kind that breathed between the trees, settled behind the ears, waited in the gaps between heartbeats. That silence had a shape now. Lila could feel it each time she stepped outside. It pressed gently against her chest, not heavy, not menacing, just present, like someone watching, without judgment. Ray moved slow around the place, always barefoot inside, his steps soft as if he didn't want to wake the floor. He'd once been a master woodworker, some said legendary, back when Bitterroot had more jobs than ghosts. But now his tools stayed hung, untouched, coated in sawdust and old stories. He never asked why Lila kept checking the window at night. Never questioned the way she fingered the mark on her wrist, now faded to a dull ash gray, but still warm some mornings like it had been drawn in fresh breath. He just poured her coffee, lit the lanterns at dusk, and fed Storm before sunrise. The days slowed. No patrols, no radio. The ranger station hadn't checked in, and Lila hadn't called out. She wasn't ready to explain what she couldn't name. She needed to feel it longer, needed to know she hadn't imagined that exhale in the woods, needed to listen. One morning, the forest floor steamed under the weight of last night's rain. Lila walked the lower trail, Storm trailing beside her without reins. She didn't talk to him anymore. They just moved in rhythm. He only ever flicked his ears now when she paused. That day, he stopped first. A black smear stretched across the low trunk of a fallen pine. Lila stepped closer. It was charcoal, not from fire but from something deliberate. 4 short horizontal marks, then 2 longer vertical lines beneath them. It wasn't letters, not exactly, but it looked timed, like rhythm, not language. She reached out but didn't touch. Storm didn't flinch. He waited, calm. The mark was repeated again farther down the trail. Same shape, same pattern. Only this one was fresh. The rain hadn't washed it away, which meant someone had come through just hours ago. And they knew the trail. They knew the rain. She crouched low, staring at it. Then, without thinking, she breathed. 4 short exhales, 2 long. The forest answered, not with sound, not with movement, just an ache in her ribs. As if the trees had leaned in just slightly, as if the silence had curved around her and said, yes. Her breath caught. She tried again. 4 short, 2 long. Storm twitched his ears once, then lowered his head to graze. It wasn't nothing. She wasn't imagining it. He reacted every time. Not like a cue, but like recognition. By the 3rd set of marks, her heart was racing. The pattern wasn't random. It followed terrain. Sharp bends in the trail, low gullies where water pooled, fallen logs. Each mark seemed to come right before a place someone could fall, could slip, could be hurt. They weren't warnings. They were guides. By dusk, she counted 12 sets in total, always in charcoal, always appearing only where they made sense. But they weren't permanent. The first set she'd seen had faded completely by the time she circled back. That night, she sketched the symbols on paper. Ray leaned over, sipping tea. Trail signs? He asked. She shook her head. Not standard, not even local tribal symbology, at least not from what I've studied. He squinted. Could be someone old, someone who remembers things differently. Do you think it's a person? Ray didn't answer. He reached into a drawer, pulled out an old topographic map, spread it across the table. He tapped one spot near a cluster of pines. Used to be a sweat lodge here, he said, before they put the road in. Story goes, the people who used it didn't speak much. Said the forest already knew everything. You just had to learn to breathe right. She stared at the map. That spot was exactly where she'd found the first symbol. Ray noticed her wrist then. The mark. Still there? He asked. She nodded slowly. He didn't speak for a while. Just stared into the fire. Finally, he said, You ever hear of the listener? She turned toward him. Old legend, he said. Goes back generations. Some say it was a spirit. Others say it was flesh and bone, just different. Lived between trees. Watched, but never interfered. Listened, not with ears, but with breath. They say it could feel the shape of your sorrow just by how you sighed. Lila's skin prickled. You believe that? She asked. Ray looked at her. Not with certainty, but with the kind of silence that speaks louder than belief. I've heard things, he said. Out here, too far for man, too soft for beast. Lila didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, listening to the logs settle, to the occasional sigh of wind down the flue. But mostly, she listened for that breath again, the one that had felt like it knew her. Just before dawn, she stepped outside. Mist hung low, and the pines looked taller than usual, draped in silver. She inhaled. 4 short, 2 long. Nothing. She closed her eyes. Tried again. This time something shifted. Not sound, not sight, but weight. The porch boards behind her gave the softest creak. She didn't turn. The air around her had cooled, but not from the breeze. Her fingers curled slowly. She wasn't scared. Not exactly. Just aware. Aware that something had answered. Then the faintest scrape. She turned. Nothing. But on the cabin's wall, just beneath the lantern hook, was a new mark. Same as before. 4 short, 2 long. Still damp, still black, still warm. She reached up, brushed it lightly with her fingertips. It hadn't been burned. It had been placed. Like someone wanted her to know, "I'm here. I heard you. You listened first." Inside, Storm stirred once, but didn't make a sound. Later that morning, as the sun pushed through, Lila stood at the tree line, holding the small notebook she'd started scribbling in. She stared at the page where she'd copied the marks. Below them, she wrote, "The forest speaks, not in noise, in breath." She flipped the page, started a new one, 4 short lines, too long. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. Not sideways, but in a spiral, curling inwards like it was coiling around her. Not wind, not warning, just breath. July didn't just arrive. It pressed in from every side, thick and choking. The trees felt tighter now, less like sanctuary, more like they were holding their breath. Bitterroot's heat wasn't dry. It was heavy, soaked into skin, clung to the base of the neck, filled the boots, made sweat feel like glue. By midday, the trail shimmered, the air above it distorted like a fever dream. Even the birds had gone quiet. Lila wiped the back of her neck with a crumpled bandana. Her flannel was tied around her waist, damp with salt. She'd spent the morning charting unusual tire patterns northeast of the old lookout, and now she was squinting at a fresh patch of ground, with lines too wide for ATVs, but too narrow for logging rigs. A few broken branches told the rest. Someone had been here. Recently, and they weren't bothering with permits. Ray crouched beside a fallen pine, brushing aside loose needles with the back of his hand. "Military tires," he muttered. "See the side flare? That's reinforced. Not for timber. These boys came loaded." Lila nodded, jaw tight. "They were here last week, too. Same pattern, West Ridge. They're circling." Ray looked at her. "They ain't just stealing wood." She didn't answer. Storm shifted behind them, stamping once, then still. They followed the tracks deeper into the slope, heat making the air swim. The trees thinned near a clearing where bundles of freshly cut pine had been stacked like discarded bones, sun-bleached and oozing sap. Flies buzzed low. A smell hung in the air. Diesel, blood, and dry rot. She moved toward the pile, notebook in hand, snapping a photo with the old Polaroid Ray had let her borrow. The shutter cracked like a knuckle. She was just about to scribble a note when gravel shifted behind them. A whistle cut the air, high, sharp, mocking. Lila turned. Sheriff Dalton Reeves stepped out of the tree line, hat low, mirrored sunglasses catching the sun like 2 knives. He was flanked by Hank Duran, thick-necked and silent, chewing something he didn't intend to swallow. "Well now," Reeve drawled. "Ain't this a party I wasn't invited to?" Ray stood slowly. Lila stayed crouched, hands still. "I got every right to be here," she said coolly. "This land's under federal protection." Reeve spat in the dust. "You're a guest out here, Monroe. Same as anyone. And guests don't snoop." He stepped closer. Storm whinnied, ears pinned back. Hank's hand drifted to his belt. Ray shifted slightly, blocking Lila's side. "Put the notebook down," Reeve said. She didn't. He reached. Ray moved. The sound of snapping twigs exploded into movement. Lila bolted. The world narrowed to sound and speed. Branches slapping her arms, boots thudding on packed earth, lungs burning. Behind her, shouts, then a shot. She didn't look back. The tree line broke. She leapt a ditch, slid on loose gravel, cut left toward the marshland. Storm galloped past her from behind, racing ahead through cattails, hooves kicking wet mud into the air. She followed, stumbling, her breath ragged, heart ricocheting inside her ribs. Then the trap snapped. Her leg jerked sideways. Pain shot up like lightning. She screamed, hit the dirt hard, teeth cracking against each other. The world went sideways. A thin metal snare gripped just above her boot, biting flesh. She reached for her belt knife. Gone. Footsteps pounded behind her. She twisted, adrenaline fighting logic. And then everything slowed. The reeds ahead parted. Something massive moved. She couldn't see it fully. Just the upper torso, soaked and dark, rising out of the marsh like a myth. shoulders broader than any man, fur slicked to its skin, the outline of ribs beneath muscle, hands large enough to palm her entire chest. It didn't charge. It stepped, deliberate, silent. Storm circled behind, snorting low. The creature turned its head, not toward Lila, but toward the sound of the men. It moved then, fast. Its arm swung low, grabbed the base of a half-fallen pine, and shoved. The trunk groaned, cracked, and toppled across the clearing like a dropped matchstick. Dirt exploded up. Reeves' shout cut short. The tree slammed down between them, shielding her. Lila didn't breathe. The creature dropped to one knee. One hand gripped the snare. The other hovered over her ankle. No growl, no sound. Just breath. Deep. Controlled. It pulled once, clean, and the snare released. Her leg throbbed, but she could move it. Then, in a fluid motion, it pressed both hands into the ground, once, twice, like rhythm. 4 short, 2 long. Storm neighed and moved beside her, dropping low enough for her to grab the saddle. She didn't remember mounting, only that her fingers found the reins, her chest slammed against the leather, and the world pulled backward as Storm surged forward. Behind her, in the swirling mud, a pair of amber eyes met hers. Not beast, not man. Something else. The earth trembled faintly under her as they rode. She looked back only once. Nothing followed. The tree was still there, its roots torn high like it had been lifted by the wind. That night, her leg packed in ice and wrapped in Ray's old denim shirt, Lila sat by the lantern, staring at the fire. Her fingers couldn't stop twitching. Not from fear, from memory. The pattern. She reached for the pencil tucked in her pocket. The same one she'd carried since grad school. She'd never noticed the etching. At the base, half faded under years of bite marks and graphite dust, one carved letter, L. She turned it over. Something thin was wrapped beneath the metal cap. Fabric, frayed, brownish red. Smelled faintly of ashen pine, a scrap of something older than her. She rubbed it once between her fingers and felt it again, that breath, not around her, inside her. Her pulse slowed. Her body knew the rhythm before her mind caught up. 4 short, 2 long. Outside the cabin, the trees held their breath. But something beneath the roots of this mountain had just started to exhale. The air had shifted, not just in temperature, but in how it moved. Like something ancient had begun to stir again after being still for too long. The days stretched longer now, but the light fell sharper. Leaves no longer shimmered green, but dulled into that golden hush that only came when autumn approached. And though the sun still rose early, there was a silence between the morning light and the ground that felt like it was waiting for something. Lila rode slow along the northern rim, Storm's hooves soft on the damp trail. The weight of the pencil in her pocket felt heavier now. She'd unwrapped the fabric again that morning, browned by time, torn at the edges, but still holding a faint memory of smoke and cedar. She didn't remember ever owning it. And yet, she did. Ray had said nothing about the tree, about the way it moved, about the shape that stood in the marsh behind it. He simply sharpened his knife that night, split kindling, lit the fire, and maybe that was his answer. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words. But that didn't quiet the ache blooming in Lila's chest every time she closed her eyes and saw that amber gaze again. Not wild, not afraid, just knowing. She spent hours now sketching the breath symbols in her notebook, trying to catalog them, map them, understand their logic. They weren't random. They always showed up near life, along migration paths, watering holes, worn places where animals came and went like clockwork, like someone, or something, was tracing the pulse of the forest itself, and following it. She didn't notice when the dirt road turned to gravel. Her hands were loose on the reins, her mind too far ahead. It wasn't until Storm halted on his own that she looked up and realized they'd reached the old bus station. The Bitterroot Valley Transit sign was crooked, rusted, hanging by a single chain. The glass in the windows had long since gone to dust. A gnarled blackberry bush grew through the side of the porch, and beyond it, sitting in a rocker that might have been part of the original station, was Martha Greer. She looked smaller than Lila remembered. Sloped shoulders, heavy scarf, hands folded in her lap like paper-thin birds. She didn't stand when Lila approached, just smiled, slow and crooked. "Thought you'd come back," she said. "Forest usually sends its people in pairs." Lila tied Storm to the hitching post, unsure what to say. She'd only met Martha once before, during orientation, when the district supervisor drove her past the site and pointed out the last woman still holding the edge of the map. Martha's eyes were bright, though, behind the folds of time. They scanned Lila like she was being read. "You got the mark, don't you?" Lila's heart twitched. She didn't answer. Martha leaned forward, motioned toward her own wrist, then reached for something tucked beneath her chair cushion. A photograph, old, faded to yellow, edges curled like dry bark. She handed it to Lila without a word. The image was blurry, black and white. A child, maybe 7, lying beneath a massive tree trunk, surrounded by shade so thick it swallowed detail. But her face was visible, dirty, barefoot, pale as ash. And on her wrist, smudged but visible, was the same leaf-shaped mark. Lila's fingers trembled as she turned the photo over. Written in faded ink, Sept 4th, 1972, found south of Elkshade. No explanation. She felt the breath leave her like a gut punch. That was the year her parents lost her. Just for a few hours, they said. Hiking near the old timber line. She was missing, then found again, curled beneath a cedar. No memory, no voice for days. They told her it was dehydration, delirium, a scare they never wanted to speak of again. She never remembered it, not really. But now, standing here, the world cracking open in quiet places, her lungs remembered what her mind had buried. It hadn't been wind that found her. It had been breath. "You were chosen early," Martha said gently. "It doesn't always make sense, but the forest, it doesn't forget." Lila sat without asking. Her knees gave slightly. The bench creaked beneath her, but she barely heard it. "I saw him," she whispered. "I saw Scala." Martha nodded, not surprised. "The listener," she said. "He doesn't speak. Never has. But he listens, to pain, to loneliness, to things we think we're hiding." Ray hadn't come with her that morning, but somehow she felt him nearby anyway. His silence, his old grief. Martha's voice thinned. "There's a line between beasts and spirits, between what we think is real and what we feel crawling along our spine in the quiet hours. Scala walks that line." Lila looked down at the photo again. "Why me?" "Because you've always heard it, even before you knew what you were listening for." They sat in silence. A truck passed far down the road, stirring dust. The trees moved just slightly. As the sun dropped, the air cooled. Lila stood to leave, her legs stiff, her hands still clutching the photograph. Martha didn't say goodbye, just tapped her temple once and turned her face toward the horizon. Back at the cabin, the evening light scattered gold across the floorboards. Ray was mending a bootlace, pretending not to notice the photo in her hand. She didn't speak at first, just unrolled her sleeve, showed him the mark again, now darker. The veins beneath it redder, as if stirred. Ray looked away. She pressed. "You've seen it too." He didn't answer. "I think he saved me once before," she said. "I think I forgot. I think I was meant to." Ray finally met her eyes. "Some wounds don't bleed. They bury, but they still itch when it rains." That night, she stood in the clearing behind the cabin. The moon caught in cloud. Storm grazed nearby, tail swatting in rhythm. The forest was thick with dew, and every step left an imprint. She exhaled. 4 short. Too long. The wind didn't answer, but the leaves did. They turned slightly, like heads nodding in unison. Storm lifted his head, ears twitching. She repeated it. 4, 2. The wind curved, not forward, around her. Then, behind her, the sound of breath. Not loud, not sharp, just presence. She didn't turn, didn't need to. Her hand reached out slowly. Fingers open, empty. Something moved at the edge of the trees. A shadow taller than any man. Shoulders hunched slightly, as if weighed by memory. No roar, no step. Just a long, deep breath, drawn from somewhere ancient and buried. And in that moment, the forest went still, like the world had blinked. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. The shadow didn't approach. It stood, watching, listening. And then it was gone, absorbed back into the trees. But in the dirt at her feet, a new mark, drawn in soot. Same breath pattern, 4, 2. But beside it, something else. A curve, a spiral. Like a signature. Like someone saying, I remember you too. The storm didn't come from the sky. It rolled up from the ground. Lightning hadn't touched down. But there was fire. It burned fast, crawling up the timbers of the ranger outpost like it had been waiting years to do so. The smoke choked out the pine needles. The roof cracked. An orange light flickered against the trees like something alive had opened its mouth. Lila's lungs stung as she ducked behind a rock outcrop, wind spinning ash across her shoulders. Rain hadn't come yet. Just heat. Dry, electric, hungry. She watched it take the watchtower first. The old steel beams screamed as they fell sideways into a skeleton of fire. Somewhere nearby, wood snapped, loud as a gunshot. She didn't need to guess who'd done this. She'd seen Reeves' truck parked just off the service road an hour earlier, engine still warm. She'd known something was off. Now she could smell it in the flames. Gasoline, grease, old canvas soaked in oil. They wanted the records gone, the maps, the permits, the photographs she'd taken of the illegal timber stacks, the hand-drawn copies of breath marks she'd pinned above her desk. All of it erased, by fire. But it wasn't just her work up there. Someone else had been in the tower. A scream tore through the trees. Not fear, agony. She scrambled up the slope, feet slipping in the ash. The smoke curled thick around her knees. She coughed once, twice, then saw him, half slumped near a collapsed beam. A man, one of Reeves' own. His leg bent backward, broken bad, blood soaking his jeans. He reached out as if to speak, then coughed something thick from his mouth. Lila dropped to her knees beside him. She didn't recognize his face at first, just the pain written across it. Then the memory hit. The same man who'd chased her through the marsh weeks ago. The one who'd loaded logs while Reeve talked about jurisdiction like it was a joke. He looked nothing like that now. He was shaking. His hands, once heavy with control, were clawing at the dirt. She hesitated. She wanted to look away, wanted to run. Let him feel a fraction of what they'd done to her. To Ray, to this land, to the breathing quiet that used to live in these trees before it was stripped, bled, and burned. But then, the air changed. She felt it first in her chest. A hush, like the world had taken a deep breath, then held it. She looked up. He was there, beyond the broken beams, just past the fire line, taller than the smoke, shoulders darkened with soot and rain that had not yet fallen. His eyes caught the orange light and turned amber, glowing like coals not quite extinguished. Scala. He stepped through the fire. No fear, no roar, only breath. Lila didn't move. The injured man saw him too. His eyes widened, terror overtaking pain. He tried to crawl backward, couldn't, screamed. Scala knelt. His hand, massive and blackened with ash, dipped into the earth beside the fallen man. Fingers dug into the mud, pulled up a clump of wet soil, roots and all. He didn't speak. He pressed the cool earth against the man's wound, slowly, gently, then reached for nearby ashes and added them in layers, smearing them like paint, thick, firm strokes across skin and cloth. The man whimpered, then stilled. His breathing slowed. Lila moved forward, crouched beside them. She didn't know what compelled her, only that she couldn't stand back anymore. She raised one arm, shielding Scala as shadows moved at the edge of the clearing. Someone was coming back. A flashlight beam danced between trees. Reeves' voice shouted something distant. Lila didn't blink. Scala looked at her, not afraid, not grateful, present, and then gone. He didn't run. He just disappeared between shadows. The air swallowed him whole, like he'd never been there. But the wound he left behind had stopped bleeding. The man gasped once, twice. Then his hand jerked toward her, gripping her arm. His voice was cracked, soft. It knew. I was scared. Lila helped him sit up. His weight slumped against her shoulder. Far behind them, Reeves' truck door slammed shut. She didn't stay to watch him leave. Later at the cabin, the man lay in the corner, bandaged with what Ray could find. He hadn't spoken again, but he didn't scream, didn't twitch. Just stared at the ceiling with wide, broken eyes like someone who'd touched something they didn't know how to name. Lila sat by the window. Her wrist itched. She pulled back her sleeve. The leaf-shaped mark wasn't black anymore. It had turned reddish-brown, like tree sap or dried blood. But not ugly, not harsh. It pulsed once beneath her skin, then faded into her. Ray stood behind her, silent. "You believe me now?" she asked. He didn't answer with words. He placed a hand on her shoulder, not to steady her, to ground himself. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Gentle, cool, as if the forest had been waiting for the fire to end. She closed her eyes and listened. 4 short, 2 long, and just beneath the wind, a breath returned. The mouth of the mine breathed colder than the forest behind it. Even in late summer, the air curling from Hollow Creek carried a dampness that clung to bone. Not quite rot, not quite life, just stillness. The kind that lived in stone, the kind that hadn't moved in generations. Lila stood just outside the entrance, one boot toe on rusted rail track, flashlight trembling slightly in her grip. The trees behind her hissed with wind, but ahead, only black. Ray didn't say anything as he tightened the strap of his pack. His shirt was soaked through from the hike up. His breath came shallow now. She'd seen the way his hand had been favoring his ribs since yesterday. He hadn't told her, but the color in his face said enough. Still he came. They stepped inside. The light swallowed fast. Walls narrowed. Wooden beams sagged overhead like ribs too tired to hold weight. The floor shifted under every step. Gravel on gravel, stone against bone. Their boots echoed hollow. Lila moved ahead, leading the beam of light along the old carvings on the support beams. Not graffiti, not names, breath symbols, burnt into wood, charcoal black, faded but still there. She ran her fingers across one of them, not daring to speak. 4 short, 2 long, again and again, but beneath it, a spiral. Then another, and another. Ray leaned in, breathing harder now. He touched one mark with 2 fingers, then looked away like it hurt to recognize. "They were counting," he said finally, voice ragged. Not just leaving signals. She stepped deeper. The tunnel widened slightly, enough for the ceiling to rise overhead. They passed a split, took the left. A stronger draft brushed against her cheek. Somewhere deeper inside, water dripped slow and steady, like the cave itself had a pulse. The walls began to change, no longer just beams and soot. Now stone carvings, wider arcs, spirals embedded in the rock, shallow but deliberate. Echoes of the same breath rhythm, but stretched, as if time had been slowed, like someone was teaching something ancient to remember itself. She pressed her hand to one. It was warm. Ray stumbled slightly. His palm flattened against the wall to steady himself. When he lifted it, dust stuck to the blood blooming at his ribs. "You should turn back," she said. He didn't. He only nodded forward. They moved again, slower. The corridor opened into a larger chamber. Lila's breath caught. Her flashlight caught the curve of the walls, etched top to bottom in layered waves of breath marks. Generations worth. Whole lives told in inhale and exhale. Names that weren't names, stories without letters. And in the center of the cavern, barely lit, stood a stone arch, thick, cracked, covered in moss. Its shape was wrong, tilted slightly, as though it had been placed, not built. At its base, a half-rotted wood beam bore a carving of 5 figures, hunched forward, arms long. Not beasts, not quite human. Behind them, trees, and under each foot, markings. 4, 2. Lila knelt. She traced the lines slowly. They weren't just writing. They were time. Every line bent in a slight curve. The kind you'd make if you were exhaling while drawing. The kind that recorded not thought, but breath. They weren't just messages. They were memories. Scala had ancestors. More than one, maybe dozens. This wasn't a singular myth. This was lineage. Behind her, Ray collapsed hard against the wall, gasping. She spun. "Ray!" His eyes were wide. His hand clutched his chest now, blood running through his fingers. "Shot must have hit deeper," he murmured. "Didn't say anything. Thought I could walk it off." She ripped her pack open, but he gripped her wrist. "No time," he rasped. "Get out. Don't let them take this. You hear me?" Then the sound hit. Boots. Dozens of them. Shouting, metal clanging off rock. Flashlights bouncing off the ceiling from the tunnel mouth. Reeve. She pulled Ray's arm around her shoulder, dragging him backward behind the arch. A shot cracked. Stone splintered beside her head. She ducked low. Ray slumped heavier. She screamed his name, but it got lost in the stampede of voices echoing off walls. A second shot, then a third. Then everything changed. The tunnel behind them roared. Not from gunfire, from something else. A presence, a weight. Then came the breath. Long, slow, low enough to make the ground vibrate. Lights flickered. The men stopped shouting. One screamed. Scala stepped into view. His chest rose slowly, massive and still. His body streaked with mud. Eyes burning like glass caught in firelight. He didn't attack. He breathed. Once. Twice. The horses outside reared. The tunnel groaned. Then the sound came. Not from him, but the wind through his chest. A deep exhale, like a thundercloud sighing. The mine ceiling cracked. Wooden supports snapped. Stone rumbled overhead. Lila dragged Ray back as rocks fell where they'd stood seconds before. Gunshots rang out. One bullet caught Scala's shoulder. His body twisted but didn't fall. He grabbed a beam and ripped it from the wall. The ceiling dropped half a ton of rock. Dust exploded. Lila couldn't see, only feel. Her hand still clutched Ray's shirt. His voice was almost nothing now. She leaned close. "Stay with me." His eyes fluttered. "You have to listen." A massive hand reached toward her through the dust. Scala. His fingers pressed 2 points against Ray's ribs. Breath short, controlled. 4, 2. She felt the rhythm in her own chest. Felt it in the earth. Felt it in her bones. She inhaled once, matching the tempo. Then again. The path ahead cleared. Not physically, but in her mind. She knew which tunnel curled left, which one angled down and circled back up through the shale. Knew which rocks would fall next. Which air was fresher. It wasn't instinct. It was inheritance. She stood, gripping Ray under the arms. Scala didn't carry him. He only breathed. And she moved, step by step, guided by rhythm. She didn't stop until the light returned. Outside, the sun was breaking through clouds. The birds had gone quiet again. She turned once. Scala was no longer behind her. Just smoke, just earth, just silence. But on the rock where they had stood, a black smear, shaped not like a leaf this time. A handprint. Large, impossibly large. Still warm. The valley didn't burn red. It burned gray. Ash fell like snow, soft and silent, coating everything in a film of silence. Even the trees seemed unsure of themselves now. Their trunks blackened, not from flame, but from standing too close to something that had lived and died in the dark. The air was thick, not with smoke, but with knowing. The kind of weight that pressed into your chest and told you this wasn't just another day. This was the last kind of day something would ever be the same. Lila stood at the ridge, wind pushing at her jacket. her eyes fixed on the old timber storage yard below. It looked deserted, but she knew it wasn't. Ray had healed just enough to help her string the charges along the interior beams. Small packs of thermite tucked beneath rotted joists, wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. Enough to bring the roof down, enough to make a statement. Not vengeance, a reset. Below, Storm paced nervously, tied near the river. The waterline had dropped 2 feet since last week, exposing a bed of gray silt and broken chain. Lila's boots left no prints in the ash. Each step forward disappeared as soon as she took the next. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the cold certainty humming in her spine. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the old pencil again, the one with the L carved in the base. It didn't write anymore. She hadn't needed it to. She looked out at the warehouse one more time. Then she lit the match. The fire took instantly. It didn't roar. It bloomed. Silent, sure, like it had been waiting. The roof folded in on itself within minutes. Blackened wood cracked and buckled. Smoke rose in low spirals, hugging the ground instead of climbing skyward, like it was trying to hide what it had done. Lila turned her face into the wind. She didn't cry. Behind her, Ray stood with one arm in a sling, watching everything without blinking. "You think it's enough?" he asked. Lila didn't answer, because it wasn't about enough. It was about what was left behind. Farther down the ridge, tires crackled. The crunch of gravel made Storm rear slightly, nostrils flaring. Reeves' truck. She knew the sound of that engine like she knew the rhythm of her own breath now. Knew the metallic rattle in the undercarriage. The way he always let the door slam twice, like one wasn't ever enough. When she turned, he was already out, hat low, face red, eyes locked on the ruins behind her. "You little bitch," he muttered, stepping forward. Ray moved, but Lila held him back. Reeves' voice rose. "You think this changes anything? You think you've stopped it? That's federal land. That's 20 grand worth of lumber gone." Lila said nothing. He kept coming. "And that animal of yours, where is it now? Hiding again. You think it's gonna save you?" Storm snorted once, pulling at the reins. Reeves' hand dropped to his belt. Not fast, not enough to draw, but enough to threaten. Then the wind shifted. Sharp, wet. The sound of branches moving too low to be the breeze. Lila turned slightly, just enough to feel it behind her. The pressure, the breath. Scala stepped out from between the trees. He wasn't hidden this time. He wasn't just a shadow. He was there, fully. Nearly 9 feet of soaked dark fur clinging to muscle and time. Rainwater glistened along his shoulders, catching the late afternoon sun in thin streaks of gold. His eyes didn't glow. They held. Reeve froze. For once, his mouth stopped moving. Scala stepped forward, slow. His feet made no sound. His breath did, low, measured. Not a warning, a presence. Reeve pulled the gun. Fired once. The shot rang out, echoing off the cliffs. Lila felt the air shift before she heard anything else. Scala turned slightly, his left shoulder jerking back. Blood welled, not much, then stopped. Lila moved. She didn't know how or when. She just knew her body collided with Scala's chest as the second shot cracked. It grazed his arm, but her arms wrapped around his ribs first. She felt his breath tremble. Not from pain, from surprise. She pressed her face to his fur. It was wet, cold, and real. Behind them, Storm screamed, charged. Reeve turned too late. The horse hit him full in the ribs, hooves tearing through the ash. His body flew sideways, slammed into the rocks near the riverbed. Lila turned back. Scala stumbled slightly, one hand gripping the ground to steady. Blood dripped slow from his shoulder, soaking into the earth like a root taking hold. Ray ran toward Reeve, tying his wrists before he could rise. The fire still burned behind them. High now, wider, but not out of control. Contained, cleansing. Scala sat down, just lowered himself to the ash. His chest rose once, then again, slower. Lila dropped to her knees beside him. He didn't look at her, just kept breathing. She felt his palm touch her chest, lightly. Not a push, a rhythm, 4 short, too long. Her eyes filled. Not tears. Recognition. He wasn't saying goodbye. He was passing something on. Behind them, Ray dragged Reeve into the open, propped him against a tree. The man wheezed, eyes wide, silent, for once. Lila didn't look back. She was listening. Scala's breathing softened. Less force. More quiet, like wind thinning out across snow. His eyes half closed, chest still. Then a final exhale. It didn't stop in the air. It moved through her, like being touched from the inside, like a second heartbeat. Then he leaned back, let the smoke wash over him. Still, quiet, but not gone. Not truly. Lila felt the ground shift slightly. Not shake, just change. As if something old had opened one door and left another one barely ajar. And then, above them, across the top ridge, movement. Lila stood slowly. Ray joined her. On the edge of the rocks, silhouetted against the fading sky, was another figure. Smaller, fur lighter, arms longer in proportion. It didn't move, just watched. And where its eyes should have glowed, they reflected golden light, just like his. Winter arrived without warning. One morning, the frost just didn't melt. By noon, the meadow had gone still. Even the elk stopped moving. It was the kind of silence that made your breath sound louder than your footsteps. The kind of cold that didn't bite, just reminded you that time was shifting again. First, snow drifted like ash, soft as memory. There was no storm, no wind. It simply began, flakes spinning down through pale light, touching the earth like they were looking for something they'd lost. Bitterroot had never felt more still. The valley held its breath. The creek froze at the edges first, white veins forming along the shallows. Birds gathered in the cottonwoods, fluffed and tight, blinking slow like old souls waiting for a season to pass. Across the cabin porch, smoke curled upward, slow and steady. The fire inside burned clean now, no longer something to fight the dark, just something to remember it. The days were shorter, but they felt longer. Not in burden, in weight. Everything was quieter now. The sky turned softer, more blue-gray than silver. And every dusk, that light settled like a hand on the back of your neck. Gentle, heavy, familiar. Not sorrow. Not exactly. But the shape of it, the shadow of something that used to be just out of reach, now wrapped around your shoulders like an old blanket. One that carried a scent you thought you'd forgotten. That morning the children returned. They came bundled in wool and mittens too big for their hands. Their voices carried in bursts, sharp and bright, and full of the kind of laughter only children can make when they've never heard a lie that stuck. They followed her through the lower trail, their feet crunching over the dusting of snow. She showed them how to find breath in the trees again, not with words, with waiting. "Don't talk," she said softly, smiling. "Just breathe like the pines do." They tried. Some failed. One or two didn't. And in that silent stretch between snowflakes and silence, they began to hear things they didn't know had a voice. The wind became rhythm. The branches above them stopped being stillness and became watchers. She hung the new braid, shorter, darker, braided tightly from fresh strands, on the low pine near the bend in the path, right at eye level for children. No one asked what it meant. They just passed by and touched it, as if they'd always known to. Later, when they circled near the fire ring, she told them a story, not one with names, just a story about the forest that remembers what people forget, about something that doesn't speak but listens, about silence that hums like a heartbeat, and breath that doesn't belong to just lungs. They didn't interrupt. They leaned forward, because they understood, even if they didn't know how. The sun dropped low behind the pines. Shadows stretched long, gold slipping through the last branches before night claimed it. One boy pointed to the ridge. "Is that where the forest ends?" he asked. She shook her head. "It doesn't end," she said. "It just gets quieter." Ray stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, watching everything like it was enough now. He didn't need to say anything. His silence was its own kind of peace. When the children left, they left slower. None of them ran. None of them shouted. It was as if they knew something sacred had passed just above their heads. The snow thickened as the night fell. The stars blinked on without ceremony. No fanfare, just arrival. She stayed behind by the creek, alone. The ice had settled now. Not solid enough to walk, but strong enough to hold moonlight. Her breath rose in slow, white curls, drifting sideways in the still air. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say, but when she leaned over the water, she saw it again. 2 breath trails, side by side. One small, one large. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She smiled, and the lines at the corners of her eyes held warmth. The world didn't move. It breathed, and she knew then what mattered hadn't disappeared. It had only changed shape. That presence wasn't bound by name or form or fear. It had never needed to be seen, only heard. Her eyes fluttered closed. She let the cold rest against her skin, and she whispered, not into the air, but into the rhythm beneath it all. Some things never die. They just keep breathing through us. The wind moved gently across the surface of the ice. Then everything stilled again, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, alive, and listening. Some stories don't end when the last word is spoken. They linger, in quiet places, in breathless pauses, in the way the light bends through the trees at dusk. And maybe that's how they're meant to survive. Not as loud declarations carved into stone, but as soft impressions left in dirt, in memory, in silence. There are things the world cannot explain, and perhaps was never meant to. Things older than language, older than maps, older than our need to name what we don't understand. And sometimes, when the noise of the world fades long enough for us to actually listen, we realize that what we called myth was never trying to be understood. It was only waiting to be felt, because some truths live deeper than proof, in kindness offered with no reward, in footsteps that don't leave prints, in breath shared between strangers, in the stillness between a heartbeat and the next. There's a kind of mercy that doesn't ask for recognition. It doesn't stand in the light. It doesn't raise its voice. It simply shows up. When we fall, when we forget how to speak, when we need something ancient and gentle to remind us that the world, for all its cruelty, still remembers how to hold us. And maybe that's the lesson hidden in the folds of every whispering tree and every fading trail. That listening is a form of love. That not every silence is empty. And that even in a world built on noise, there will always be something out there, watching, waiting, breathing, not to be feared, but to be followed. Thank you for walking this path with us. If something in this story moved you, if a line echoed, or a moment made you pause, we'd love to know. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell us what stayed with you. And if you'd like to keep listening to more stories that stir the still places in you, consider subscribing, because some stories, like breath, are meant to be shared. And we're just getting started.